Hello people of the internet, it's Amanda, and for today's video, I'm here to talk about Aishu Cinderella, or the Cinderella Addiction. It stars Tsuchiya Tao, Tanaka Kei, and Coco. And the thing with this film is, initially I wanted to take my own pace, sort of like when I'm going to watch it, when I'm going to review it, all of that. But so many people everywhere, I mean Facebook, my Twitter, even in the comment section in some of my videos, have been recommending this film so much. I tried as much as possible to steer clear from spoilers, even if I personally, usually I get more interested in something whenever I read spoilers, but then for this one, since it's a psychological thriller, I don't want it to be too predictable when I dive into it. So I really did a good job in terms of not reading spoilers about this, other than the fact that people have been talking about it and saying so many vague things about it that's actually quite intriguing, and that's why I finally gave in, finally watched it. And what's interesting is I needed to discuss it with someone before I'm able to come up with this review, just because there's just so many things to talk about it, which we'll be doing in today's video, so let's just get to it. Usually when it comes to these types of videos, I warn people that, I'll probably give spoilers here and there and stuff like that, but I feel like Aishu Cinderella is definitely an experience that you have to really dive into, so I wouldn't be giving spoilers throughout this video. I'm quite sure and adamant that I wouldn't be doing so, but I just want to talk about the experience of watching it. But before that, as usual, let's get to the plot first, or the synopsis of the film, if you will. So basically it's about Koharu, which is Tsuchiya Tao, and she the story starts off with everything just going haywire in her life. She one disaster over another happens, and then when she thinks that it's over, something happens again, and it's just a crazy series of events for her in one day or one night. But it leads to her meeting the character of Tanaka Kei, who is Daigo, who ends up, who she finds out is actually a doctor. And they dive into this whirlwind of a romance that ends up with them getting married. Now, Daigo actually has an 8-year-old daughter, Hikari. And one of the aspects as to why, they ended up getting married is because Koharu immediately clicks off with Hikari, which is something that is sort of again, very similar to the title of the film, is like a fairy tale-esque kind of setup when it comes to how being a stepmother and having a stepdaughter is and that's, I think, the beauty of the whole idea of Aishu Cinderella in the title of it, because initially you would think that Cinderella is the character, or referring to the character of Koharu, but because she ends up marrying this doctor who's very well off in life, and it's like a whirlwind romance, very similar to how Cinderella and Prince Charming are in the fairy tale. But slowly you sort of realize as well that it's not really Koharu who the title is referring to, at least that's my interpretation of it, but it's a whole dynamic of being a stepmother and trying so hard to not fit into that stepmother stereotype that's often depicted in fiction, in film, or in TV shows or anything like that, where the stepmother is just evil or anything. But it's more of, because of Koharu's own background, which will be discussed in the film as well, she has this sort of idea that she has to be the best mom to Hikari. Now, I think for me, that's my interpretation of the whole Cinderella aspect of it. It's not really the whole love story between Daigo and Koharu, but really more of like the relationship, the motherly relationship that happened between Koharu and Hikari. Now, with that said, so after, the whole marriage and everything, Hikari starts exhibiting very difficult characteristics, or something about her personality is off. And instead of Koharu going, haywire with like how to deal with it and everything like that, because obviously she's a lot younger and she has to suddenly take on the responsibility of being a stepmom. For some reason, like, there's something about this film that is beautifully, like, in terms of cinematography, in terms of the scoring and everything like that, it's so vivid in a way. And it's so, like, there's just everything about it that's so sharp. But it's kind of like it gives you that feeling at the back of your head that something is wrong, even if everything is so picture perfect. And I think that's a brilliance in terms of how this film was made, is that throughout the entire thing, everything is perfect. Like, again, not really perfect, but the way that it's projected on screen, there's a certain level of perfection to it that that you feel like there's something wrong, that there's something that has to like happen. But then they really, like, they have a way of sort of like cutting the scenes in a way that you don't exactly know what's going on with like the thought process of the characters, just when you think that there's a certain payoff that's going to happen, or just when you think that something is going to jump at you, they immediately cut it off into this other scene that explains what happened, but not necessarily what led to the event that happened in the film. Again, it's a different experience, like watching this film and just trying to explain it. It's kind of like difficult, but again, there's a certain mastery to how this film was made in a way, in my opinion, that add to the experience of just watching it and absorbing what the plot is about. In terms of the escalation of the events of the film, I would say that the payoff in the end, it makes you sort of like wonder what kind of film did you just finish or did you just watch. But it makes sense in a way that it would lead to that kind of thing, because that's the entire theme of the film throughout the story. Like, there's a certain vividness and darkness in this film that is ever present since the first scene, but because of how it's presented, like, it's very crisp, it's very fairy tale like, the way that it's being delivered and everything about it, there's a certain cleanness to it that even if you see things coming in a way, especially with that payoff in the end, it makes sense as to how the film was concluded. It makes sense like how all the events that happened beforehand ended up in that particular moment in the ending. And yeah, again, I wouldn't want to spoil what it is, but I think the downside of the film is, if you're someone who's into psychological thrillers, or you want, your suspense to have like massive payoffs, you love the explosiveness of these types of like plots and everything like that, Aishu Cinderella might not be the film for you. Because around, I think, 30-40 minutes into the film, again, it's definitely a slow burn type of narrative that builds up certain moments in a way, but only leading up to like the payoff in the end. And again, it's really more of that type of film where you feel like there's something wrong, but it doesn't give it to you fully whenever it sort of like builds something up. So if you're I think 20-30 minutes into the film, like, if you're not into these types of narratives, you would feel like, what's happening? Like, nothing's happening and we're already into a huge bulk of the film. So again, if that's not the type of story for you, then you probably wouldn't be able to enjoy it. I think overall, in terms of performances, all of them, especially Coco, who played Hikari, she has a certain she has a way of sort of like bouncing off with the characters of Tao and Tanaka Kei in a way that you can see the kid in her. It's definitely not like Orphan, the horror film where it's a kid having very weird tendencies, like very psychopathic tendencies or anything like that. But there's nothing else in there. For her, you can definitely see the child in her, which makes this entire thing a lot more twisted in its own way. Then there's also the character of both Tao and Tanaka Kei for Daigo and Koharu, where it's like these two people found each other, and both of them are trying so hard to sort of like fix this dynamic of, a family that's remarried or anything like that, that it snaps them into this other twistedness that that contradicts, the very idea of like good people, because they are viewed as good people in the beginning of the story, but we already get like hints here and there that there's something wrong with them as well. So it's a very chaotic combination of like people meeting each other that eventually leads to this event. And what's interesting about this is, as the viewer, you're the one being caught into questioning what is happening in the film. Like the characters themselves, they're not questioning what is happening around them, especially for Koharu, since most of the story we see from her perspective. Like she doesn't question the things that are happening. Instead, she does things that you feel like if it's a normal protagonist, they would do something very differently. But then again, it all falls back to the idea of this whole stepmothership thing, where because of her own experience, it's sort of like this whole like escape from one role and then jumping into another role that she feels is a lot more ideal, and she tries so hard to fit into that. The beauty of it lies in the cinematography, the way that it's edited, and even the music, like the scoring. We all know that classical music is definitely, it can either be very soothing, but then when used in certain moments, it can feel very eerie, and this film definitely took advantage of that. It juxtaposed a lot of like scenes where everything is just so like you can't exactly figure out what characters are thinking, and therefore classical music sort of like eerily enters the scene, and it adds a little bit of like it definitely contrasts the whole like everything's fine, everything's in place. What you see visually and what you're hearing has a certain disconnect, which definitely adds to, again, the experience that you feel it at the back of your head that there's something out of place in this entire thing, even if your mind is sort of like telling you, because of what you're seeing, that everything's fine. So again, I think in terms of composition, this film was definitely an experience. It's definitely dark, but if you're definitely not into these types of films where it doesn't feed you the thrill, or it doesn't give you like small payoffs throughout and then a massive explosive one in the end, then Aishu Cinderella might not be your type of film. But again, in terms of just being a holistic experience as it is, I think that it's definitely brilliantly made. It can get a little bit like slow in terms of the beginning, again, because of like you don't exactly know what the film is going to give you. But overall, definitely a good watch in my opinion. It just depends again on your taste or what you feel like in terms of mystery or psychological thrillers and stuff like that. But personally, I really love it. I recommend it. That said, so if you've seen the film, kindly tell me down in the comments below what are your thoughts on it. If you've seen this video, it convinced you to watch the film, and then I hope that you go back to the video and tell me what you think of it. If you have any other recommendations for me, I would always want to hear about more films or dramas that you would highly recommend. I would totally check them out. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to my channel and you would want to hear more from me, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon in a new video. Bye!